The bank's security cameras would later capture it all. One of the biggest mistakes in corporate history. The moment a well-dressed black woman, standing calmly in line, was accused, humiliated, and slapped in front of stunned customers. The moment security guards twisted her arms and dragged her away like a common criminal. But no one, not the smug bank manager, not the disrespectful teller, not even the high-ranking executives watching from their glass offices, had the slightest idea of the power she held. Because the woman they had just arrested owned the entire bank. Welcome back to my channel. If you love shocking stories filled with revenge, twists, and justice served cold, then you are in for a ride. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another jaw-dropping tale. It started as an ordinary day at Imperial Bank, a financial empire that catered to the elite. The wealthy walked in with confidence, while those who seemed less fortunate were met with disdain. Among the sea of tailored suits and designer handbags, a woman in a simple yet elegant dress waited patiently for her turn. When she reached the counter, she handed over her documents. "I need to access my account," she said. The teller barely glanced at her before curling his lips in disgust. "Do you even have an account here?" he scoffed. Her expression remained calm. "Yes, and I have all the necessary documents." But before the teller could even check, the branch manager stormed over, eyes filled with instant judgment. "Security!" he barked. "We have a fraudster trying to pull a scam." A murmur rippled through the bank. Customers turned their heads. Some whispered, others smirked, as if this was some form of entertainment. "You people think you can just walk into places like this and take what you do not deserve?" the manager sneered. Then it happened. A loud, humiliating slap that echoed through the high ceilings. The impact made her head tilt slightly to the side. Gasps filled the air, and before she could recover, rough hands seized her arms, twisting them behind her back. "You are under arrest for attempting fraud at a prestigious institution," the security guard growled. She did not resist. She did not scream. But as they dragged her toward the exit, she turned her head ever so slightly and delivered a line that would soon shake the entire bank to its core. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The headlines would later call it the most expensive slap in banking history. The footage would go viral. Millions would watch in shock as a wealthy black CEO was humiliated in her own bank. But in that moment, the staff had no idea. They were too busy dragging her across the marble floor, treating her like a criminal. A man in an expensive suit chuckled from the VIP lounge. "Serves her right," he muttered to his colleague. "People like her do not belong here." The security guards tightened their grip as she was shoved toward the exit. Outside, a police car screeched to a stop. Officers stepped out, their hands resting on their weapons. The manager puffed out his chest, eager to make an example of her. "This woman attempted fraud in our bank," he declared, practically beaming with pride. "Arrest her immediately." One officer, a tall man with a serious expression, took a step forward. "Name?" he asked the accused woman. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "Celeste Harrington." The officer's pen froze mid-air. His eyes widened slightly. "Did you say Celeste Harrington?" A ripple of confusion crossed the faces of the bystanders. The name sounded familiar, powerful even. But the bank manager scoffed. "Yeah, sure," he said, laughing. "And I am the President of the United States." Celeste did not react. Instead, she turned to the officer, locking eyes with him. "Check your database." For a moment, silence blanketed the scene. Then, with slow precision, the officer pulled out his phone, typed something, and after a few seconds, his face drained of color. He swallowed hard before looking up at the bank manager. "You fool." His voice trembled. "You just assaulted the CEO of Imperial Bank." The smirk disappeared from the manager's face. The teller gasped audibly. The security guards, still gripping Celeste's arms, suddenly loosened their hold. But it was too late. Celeste straightened her sleeves, her posture commanding. She did not yell. She did not need to. Her next words cut through the air like a knife. "Now, let me show you how I handle people who underestimate me." The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The very people who had mocked and manhandled Celeste were now frozen, eyes wide with panic. The bank manager, who had been so eager to throw her out, took a shaky step back. The smug teller who had sneered at her? His face had gone ghostly pale. The police officer, still staring at his phone, cleared his throat. "Ms. Harrington, I sincerely apologize," he stammered. "I had no idea—" Celeste held up a hand, silencing him. Her piercing gaze remained fixed on the bank manager, whose lips parted, but no words came out. "You did not know who I was," she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of unshaken power. "And that is the problem." A nervous hush spread through the crowd. Some customers discreetly reached for their phones, recording the unfolding drama. Others simply gawked, too stunned to look away. The bank manager attempted to laugh, but it came out as a choked, nervous sound. "Ms. Harrington, ma'am, this is just a misunderstanding." He wiped the sweat beading on his forehead. "Surely we can talk this through." Celeste tilted her head, studying him. "A misunderstanding?" she echoed. "You called security before even looking at my documents. You assumed I was a fraud because of how I look. You let your personal bias dictate how you treat customers in my bank." The manager's eyes darted around, looking for someone, anyone, to defend him. But the staff remained silent, avoiding his gaze. Then Celeste turned to the security guards. "You," she said, her tone sharp. "You put your hands on me without a second thought. Tell me, would you have done the same if I were a man in a $1,000 suit?" The guards swallowed hard. They had no answer. Celeste took a step forward and the bank manager flinched. "Let me make something very clear," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "In the next few minutes, I am going to do two things. First, I am going to walk into my office, the one on the top floor with my name on the door. Second," she paused, letting the tension build, "I am going to fire every single person who disrespected me today." A collective gasp spread through the room. Then, without another word, Celeste turned on her heel and strode toward the elevator. The doors slid open smoothly. She stepped inside, not sparing the stunned employees another glance. Just as the doors began to close, she met the bank manager's horrified eyes one last time. "Enjoy your last few minutes in my bank." The moment the elevator doors shut, panic exploded like wildfire. The bank manager's breath came in quick gasps as he turned to the security guards. She is bluffing, right?" His voice was shaky, his confidence crumbling. But the guards did not answer. One of them wiped his sweaty palms on his uniform, eyes darting toward the customers still recording the scene. The smug teller from earlier gripped the edge of his counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. "She cannot just fire us like that," the teller whispered. But even he did not sound convinced. The police officer, who had once been ready to haul Celeste away, rubbed his temple. "Oh, she absolutely can," he muttered under his breath. "And if I were you, I would start packing." The bank manager felt his stomach drop. He turned to the nearest employee, his voice suddenly desperate. "Get upstairs. Talk to someone, anyone, who can fix this. Call corporate. Call somebody." But before the employee could even take a step, a sharp ding echoed through the bank. Every head turned toward the massive digital screen mounted on the far wall, the one that usually displayed bank announcements. But this time, something was different. A live feed flickered onto the screen. The video was broadcasting directly from the CEO's office, from Celeste's office. She sat behind a sleek black desk, her manicured nails drumming lightly against the surface. The city skyline stretched behind her, bathed in golden sunlight. And then she spoke. "Attention, all employees of Imperial Bank." Her voice was calm, but there was a razor-sharp edge to it. "As of this moment, I am personally reviewing every security and customer service violation that has taken place in my establishment." The bank manager's knees nearly buckled. "And I am starting with today's incident." A series of gasps filled the room. Some employees backed away from the screen as if Celeste could reach through it and fire them on the spot. But she was not finished. "I have already sent emails to my legal and HR departments. If your name is on that report, do not bother coming in tomorrow. Your termination letters will be waiting." The bank manager made a strangled noise in his throat. "No, No, she cannot just. Celeste leaned forward, her dark eyes filled with the kind of authority that crushed weak men. And for those of you who let this happen and said nothing? She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Your silence has consequences too. The weight of Celeste's words crashed over the room like a tidal wave. The employees stood frozen, their faces drained of color. The silence was deafening. Only the occasional nervous shuffle or the distant hum of the security cameras could be heard. The bank manager clutched his chest, his breath ragged. This cannot be happening, he mumbled, his eyes darting wildly. There has to be a way to fix this. But deep down, he knew there was not. Celeste leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable as she continued speaking through the live feed. I built this bank from the ground up, trusting that the people I hired would uphold the values we stand for. But today, I saw something disgraceful. She paused, letting her words sink in. You saw a black woman in casual clothes and assumed she did not belong. You treated me like a criminal in my own bank. And the worst part? Her eyes darkened. None of you questioned it. A few employees lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze through the screen. The customers in the bank, who had initially been entertained by the drama, now looked on in fascination. Some whispered among themselves, others discreetly filmed, knowing this moment would go viral within hours. The bank manager suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the microphone at the front desk. His voice crackled through the speakers, desperation dripping from every word. Miss Harrington, please, this is all a huge misunderstanding. I swear to you, if we had known… Celeste's laughter cut through his excuse like a blade. A cold, mirthless sound. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me with respect. And that is the exact problem. The bank manager felt the room closing in around him. Sweat trickled down his temple as he turned to his employees, searching for backup. But they all avoided his gaze, unwilling to be dragged down with him. Celeste exhaled slowly, her next words carrying the weight of finality. Actions have consequences, and you, Mr. Reynolds, are about to face yours. The bank manager, Mr. Reynolds, stiffened. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, Celeste delivered the final blow. Hand over your keys, your access badge, and any company property. Effective immediately. You are fired. A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Mr. Reynolds stumbled back as if he had been struck. His hands trembled as they hovered over the keycard clipped to his belt. Please, Ms. Harrington. I have been working here for years. Celeste's gaze was steel. Years of employment do not erase a single moment of discrimination. The security guards, the same ones who had dragged her out, now hesitated, unsure of what to do. But Celeste was already one step ahead. Escort him out. The irony was almost poetic. Two guards moved toward Mr. Reynolds, who let out a strangled noise of protest. No! You cannot do this! This is… His words were cut off, as the guards grabbed him by the arms and led him toward the exit. The same doors Celeste had been forced through not long ago. As he was dragged away, Celeste delivered her final words. Remember this moment, Mr. Reynolds, because the next time you judge someone by their appearance, it might just cost you everything. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind Mr. Reynolds, sealing his fate. The bank lobby was eerily silent, except for the muffled chatter of customers still recording the scene. Some employees exchanged nervous glances, their minds racing. If the manager, the highest-ranking person in this branch, had been fired in an instant, what did that mean for the rest of them? A trembling voice finally broke the silence. Ms. Harrington, please. The arrogant teller from earlier, the same one who had smirked as Celeste was dragged away, now looked pale as a ghost. He stepped forward, wringing his hands together. I was just following orders. I did not mean to offend you. Celeste's expression did not change. Following orders? She leaned closer to the camera, her voice sharp. Tell me something. When you humiliated me in front of all these people, when you smirked as I was dragged out in handcuffs, was that in the employee handbook? The teller's lips parted, but no words came out. Celeste exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Number, you enjoyed it. You relished in your power, believing you were superior to someone you assumed was beneath you. The teller took a shaky step backward, but Celeste was not done. Let me ask you another question. She tilted her head, her voice dangerously soft. How long have you worked here? The teller swallowed hard. 2 years. Celeste let out a slow, knowing sigh. 2 years. And yet, not once did you recognize the face of the woman who owns the very company signing your paychecks? A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Employees shifted uncomfortably, realizing just how deep their mistake ran. Celeste gave a tight smile. It is truly amazing how some people only learn respect when their job is on the line. The teller's breath hitched. Please, Miss Harrington, I have a family to feed. Celeste's gaze did not waver. So, do the people you mistreat every day. The teller's head dropped in shame, his shoulders shaking slightly. But Celeste was not moved. She had seen too many people like him. People who only begged for mercy when they were the ones suffering. She turned her attention to the rest of the employees. Some looked fearful, others guilty, but all were silent. I want every employee who was complicit in today's events to step forward. Her voice was crisp and unwavering. Now. The weight of her command hung thick in the air. Employees hesitated, glancing at one another. Then, slowly, one by one, several workers stepped forward. Each movement was stiff, hesitant, filled with dread. A few employees had tears in their eyes, their regret evident. Others simply bowed their heads, awaiting their fate. Celeste's voice remained calm, but her next words sent a chill down their spines. All of you, hand over your badges. You are done here. A collective gasp spread through the room like wildfire. Some employees looked as though the ground had crumbled beneath them. Hands trembled as they fumbled to remove their badges, their faces a mix of disbelief and dread. One woman, a mid-level banker named Lisa, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Please, Ms. Harrington, I did not do anything wrong. I was just at my desk. I did not participate. Celeste's gaze cut through her like a blade. And that is the problem. Lisa froze. Celeste leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with disappointment. You saw what was happening. You heard them mocking me. You watched as I was humiliated, arrested, and dragged out like a criminal. And you said nothing. Tears spilled down Lisa's face, but Celeste was unmoved. There is no such thing as an innocent bystander when injustice is unfolding right in front of you. Lisa let out a broken sob, her fingers tightening around her badge. One by one, the employees placed their badges on the counter. Some dropped them with shaking hands, others slammed them down in frustration. A few begged, whispering desperate apologies, but Celeste remained silent, her face unreadable. Then, a man in a gray suit, one of the senior bankers, let out a bitter laugh. This is ridiculous, he scoffed, his voice laced with resentment. You are going to fire half the staff over a misunderstanding? Celeste's eyes darkened. A misunderstanding? She took a step forward, her presence commanding. Tell me, Mr. Brooks, would it still be a misunderstanding if I was just another black woman walking into this bank today? If I was not the CEO, if I did not have the power to hold you accountable, would anyone here be facing consequences? Mr. Brooks clenched his jaw, his silence answering for him. Celeste tilted her head. Number, I would have walked out of here in handcuffs, and you all would have gone home to your families like nothing happened. That is not a misunderstanding. That is the reality you helped create. The room was suffocatingly quiet. Finally, Celeste exhaled, her voice cool and sharp. Anyone who believes they should not be fired is welcome to leave now. But let me be clear. This bank will no longer be a safe haven for discrimination. A few employees hesitated, then turned on their heels, storming out without another word. But most remained, their faces pale, their eyes filled with shame. Celeste straightened her shoulders. Good. Now, Let us rebuild. A tense silence filled the air as the fired employees exited, some grumbling under their breath while others looked devastated. The remaining staff stood frozen, their hearts pounding as they waited for Celeste's next move. She turned to them, her sharp eyes scanning the group. For those of you still standing here, I need you to understand something. Her voice was crisp, unwavering. This bank will no longer operate under the shadows of discrimination and unchecked arrogance. If you wish to remain, you will uphold the values of integrity, respect, and professionalism. If you cannot, you are free to leave now. A few employees exchanged nervous glances, but no one moved. Celeste gave a tight nod. Good. Now, let us talk about the future. She walked toward the center of the lobby, commanding attention effortlessly. First, I will be conducting a full audit of this branch. Every employee's performance, conduct, and history will be reviewed. Anyone found to have participated in discriminatory behavior, even if it was subtle, will be held accountable. The weight of her words sent a shiver through the room. The remaining employees knew there was no room for dishonesty now. Celeste's tone softened just slightly. But for those of you who truly want to make this right, there will be an opportunity. This is not just about punishing those who failed. It is about setting a new standard. A brave voice finally spoke up. It was a younger teller, a woman named Rachel, who had been standing near the back, silent until now. Ms. Harrington, She hesitated, then took a breath. I saw what happened earlier, and I did not stop it. I am ashamed of that. But I do not want to work in a place where this is normal. I want to do better. Celeste studied her for a long moment, then nodded. That is the first step. A ripple of quiet agreement spread through the remaining employees. Some nodded, others murmured words of commitment. The shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. Celeste's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Then let us begin. But just as the tension began to ease, the front doors burst open. A group of police officers stormed inside, their hands hovering over their weapons. Celeste Harrington, we need you to come with us immediately. Gasps echoed through the bank. A fresh wave of panic swept over the employees. Celeste, however, did not flinch. Her gaze was steady, unreadable. On what grounds? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. The lead officer hesitated for half a second, then pulled out a document. You are under investigation for financial fraud. A stunned silence fell over the room. Celeste's expression did not change, but her fingers curled slightly at her sides. This was not a coincidence. Someone was trying to take her down. And she had a very good idea who it was. A heavy silence swallowed the room. The accusation hung in the air like a dark cloud, shocking everyone into stunned stillness. Employees glanced at one another, their eyes wide with disbelief. Just moments ago, Celeste had been firing those who had mistreated her, taking back control. And now, the police were here to drag her away? Celeste's expression remained unreadable. Her dark eyes locked onto the lead officer as she slowly crossed her arms. Financial fraud? Her voice was eerily calm. I own this bank. What exactly am I accused of? The officer shifted uncomfortably before clearing his throat. There have been reports of suspicious activity linked to your accounts. Celeste let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Suspicious activity? Let me guess. Anonymous tip? The officer's silence was all the confirmation she needed. This was a setup. A slow smirk spread across Celeste's lips as she took a step forward. I hope you have an airtight case, officer. Because if you do not, you are about to be part of the biggest lawsuit this city has ever seen. A nervous flicker crossed the officer's face, but he masked it quickly. Ms. Harrington, please cooperate. We can do this the easy way, or what? Celeste interrupted, tilting her head. You will arrest me in front of my employees? You will drag me out in handcuffs like a common criminal? Because let me remind you, that is exactly what happened to me earlier today, and your officers had to drop the charges when they realized their mistake. Do you really want to make another one? The tension in the room was suffocating. Some of the employees shifted uneasily, while others clenched their jaws, anger burning in their eyes. Then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. "This is wrong." Heads turned as Rachel, the young teller who had spoken earlier, stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. "I do not believe this. She is being targeted." A murmur rippled through the remaining staff. One by one, others started speaking up. "Ms. Harrington has always been fair. Someone is trying to take her down. This is not justice. This is retaliation. I was here all day. She did nothing wrong." The officers hesitated, clearly not expecting the employees to stand by Celeste. The lead officer frowned, glancing at his partner, as if silently questioning the legitimacy of their orders. Celeste seized the moment. "Unless you have a signed warrant and actual evidence, I suggest you leave." Her voice was cold, cutting through the air like steel. "Because the moment you try to lay a hand on me without proof, I will make sure your entire department answers for it." A thick pause followed. The officer clenched his jaw, then exhaled sharply. He turned to his men and gave a stiff nod. "Stand down." Just like that, the officers backed away. Celeste did not move, did not breathe, until the last of them exited through the glass doors. Only then did she allow herself the smallest smirk. But she knew this was not over. Someone was pulling strings, someone powerful, and she was going to find out who. The tension in the room barely had time to settle before Celeste turned toward her employees, her sharp gaze sweeping over them. She had just won one battle, but she was at war. And now, she needed to figure out exactly who had set her up. Her mind raced through possibilities. Who had the power to send police officers after her on false charges? Who was desperate enough to risk a public scandal just to take her down? Then, a slow realization crept into her mind. There was only one person with both the motive and the reach to do this. Gerald Whitman. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the regional director. The man who had dismissed her as nothing more than a temporary figurehead, despite her being the CEO. The man who had shaken her hand with a smile while secretly trying to tear her down behind the scenes. He was the one pulling the strings. She exhaled slowly, then turned to her assistant, Daniel, who had been standing in stunned silence. "Call legal. Now." Daniel blinked, then quickly nodded, pulling out his phone. Celeste pivoted toward the employees. "If any of you know anything, if you have seen or heard something suspicious involving upper management, now is the time to speak." A beat of silence passed. Then, Rachel, the young teller, stepped forward once again. "Miss Harrington, I do not have solid proof, but I overheard something a few days ago." She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Mr. Whitman was on the phone in his office. He said something about pushing her out before the board gets involved. I did not think much of it then. But now—" Celeste's eyes darkened. "He is trying to get me removed." And he was not just playing office politics. He was playing dirty. A new sense of determination settled over her. If Whitman wanted a fight, he was about to get one. She turned back to Daniel, who had just ended his call. "The legal team is on standby," he confirmed. Celeste nodded. "Good. Because I am about to show Mr. Whitman exactly what happens when you try to destroy the wrong woman." Her voice was ice, her confidence unshaken. This was not just about firing a few corrupt employees anymore. It was about exposing an entire system that had been working against her from the start. And she was not backing down. Celeste moved swiftly, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors as she made her way to her office. The moment she stepped inside, Daniel shut the door behind them, his expression tense. "What is the plan?" he asked. Celeste's mind was already working 100 steps ahead. Gerald Whitman thought he was untouchable. He thought he could manipulate the system, paint her as a fraud, and have her removed before she even had a chance to fight back. But he had underestimated her. She took a deep breath and turned to Daniel. "Get me every piece of financial data on Whitman. I want his transactions, his approvals, every shady deal he's ever been a part of." Daniel nodded and immediately got to work, pulling out his laptop and typing furiously. Meanwhile, Celeste picked up her phone and dialed the chairman of the board, Leonard Sterling, a man who had always been neutral in company politics, but valued results over everything else. The call connected. "Celeste, what a surprise!" Leonard's deep voice carried an amused tone. "I was not expecting to hear from you tonight." "Neither was I," Celeste responded, keeping her voice steady. "But I assume you have already heard about the little spectacle at the bank today?" A pause. Then a sigh. "Yes. Unfortunate, really. But there have been concerns about your leadership. People are talking, Celeste. Some believe you are making reckless changes." Celeste's grip on the phone tightened. "And by people, you mean Gerald Whitman." Leonard was silent for a moment. Then, "Whitman has influence, and he has evidence that there have been irregularities under your management." Celeste nearly laughed. The man had the audacity to fabricate evidence against her. "Do not believe everything Whitman tells you," she said, her voice firm. "He is trying to frame me because I exposed the corruption under his leadership. He orchestrated the police raid to humiliate me, and I have proof." Another pause. "Proof?" Leonard finally asked, curiosity creeping into his voice. At that exact moment, Daniel turned his screen toward her. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "You need to see this." Celeste looked at the screen, and her eyes widened. It was bigger than she thought. Whitman had not just been plotting against her. He had been embezzling millions. And now, she had the proof to destroy him. She turned back to the phone, her voice calm but lethal. "Leonard, I am about to send you something that will change everything." This was it. The final move. And Celeste was about to checkmate the man who tried to ruin her. Celeste took a deep breath, steadying her emotions as she forwarded the damning files to Leonard Sterling. Within seconds, she heard him inhale sharply on the other end of the line. "My God, this is bad. This is very bad." His voice had lost all amusement. The evidence was undeniable. Gerald Whitman had been funneling money through fake accounts, approving fraudulent loans, and using bank resources for personal gain. And now, the proof was in the chairman's hands. "Celeste," Leonard finally said, his tone now serious. "This is not just a termination-level offense. This is criminal." A cold satisfaction settled in Celeste's chest. Gerald had orchestrated her downfall, but instead, he had set himself up for destruction. "I need you to act quickly," she said, "before he catches wind that he has been exposed." Leonard was already on the move. "Consider it done. By morning, Whitman will be stripped of his position, and I will personally ensure law enforcement gets involved." Celeste allowed herself a small smile. Justice was finally being served. But there was still one last thing she needed to do. She hung up and turned to Daniel. "Call a meeting. I want all employees in the main hall in 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, Celeste stood at the front of the Grand Bank lobby, facing a sea of employees. Some looked nervous, others confused. The very security guards who had arrested her just hours ago stood stiffly, avoiding eye contact. She took a step forward, her voice steady, commanding. "Some of you failed today. Some of you chose prejudice over professionalism. Some of you saw injustice and said nothing." A tense silence filled the room. No one dared to speak. "I am not firing anyone today," she continued, "except for those directly involved in corruption." Her sharp eyes locked onto the senior managers who had been in Whitman's circle. "If you are guilty, resign before I make it public." A murmur rippled through the crowd as 3 executives immediately lowered their heads, knowing their time was up. Celeste turned her attention back to the employees. "For the rest of you, I am giving you a chance to rebuild this bank the right way, a chance to prove that this institution is more than its mistakes." She paused, scanning their faces. "And to the ones who stood by and did nothing, remember this moment. Because the next time I see injustice in this bank, and you choose silence, you will be out the door." The message was clear. This was no longer Gerald Whitman's institution. This was Celeste Harrington's bank now. A slow clap broke the silence, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause, respect, admiration. Even those who doubted her before now saw her strength. Celeste stood tall, shoulders squared. She had walked in today as a suspect. She was walking out as a legend.